Imagine your first day at work, and your job is helping build the largest structure humanity has ever attempted. But there's a problem. There are no cranes, no trucks, no engines, no machines waiting to make your job easier. Then someone points toward a limestone block weighing several tons. Your assignment sounds ridiculously simple. Move it. No engine starts. Instead, your crew grabs the ropes. You plant your feet in the sand, lean backward, and pull. Human muscle is about to become the machine. And then you finally look up. That's when you realize moving the stone isn't even the frightening part, because somehow blocks like this don't just need to move across Egypt, they need to go up there. But here's the first surprise. The people doing this work weren't simply the chained slave army that movies taught us to imagine. So if they weren't just an enormous army of slaves, who actually built the pyramids? The real workforce was far more organized than the familiar movie image of endless slaves dragging stones. Archaeologists discovered settlements and burials near Giza connected with people who worked on these enormous royal projects. And this wasn't one identical mass of workers. There were skilled craftsmen, labor crews, specialists, and organized teams performing very different jobs. Workers could be divided into crews and smaller groups, turning thousands of people into something remarkable, a coordinated construction system. But thousands of workers create another enormous problem. They get hungry, very hungry. Somebody has to feed all of them. And food, housing, and supplies reveals something important. Pyramid building required far more than people pulling ropes. Still, eventually you have to return to the problem sitting outside, a gigantic block of stone. So, how do humans move something weighing several tons? One surprisingly simple answer was the wooden sledge, a technology ancient Egypt used for transporting heavy loads. Your crew gathers around. Everyone grabs the rope. You lean backward and pull. Slowly, the sledge crawls across the sand. But then you notice another worker doing something strange. He's pouring water onto the sand. Why? There's clever physics behind it. Properly dampened sand can reduce the resistance a heavy sledge faces while being pulled. And slowly, with teamwork, ropes, sledges, and careful preparation, the seemingly impossible block begins to move. Success? Well, not quite. Getting the stone across the ground is impressive, but there's a much harder question. How do you get that stone up the pyramid? Ramps were almost certainly part of the answer, but here's the mystery. Exactly how were those ramps arranged? The frustrating part is that no complete ancient instruction manual survives telling us precisely how the Great Pyramid was raised. Researchers have proposed straight ramps, turning systems, and combinations of smaller ramps as possible solutions. But whatever the exact method, every new layer created the same problem. The stone had to travel higher and higher and higher. After hours surrounded by stone, rope, sand, and dust, however, your body has a much simpler question. When do we eat? And what did you actually eat when your job demanded this much energy every single day? Bread was a major staple, produced on a scale capable of helping support a large workforce. Beer was also an important everyday staple in ancient Egypt, very different from imagining a modern bar drink. Archaeological evidence also points towards substantial food provisioning, including livestock used to support people around the Giza complex. Which means something important. Every worker moving stone depended on other people. People baking, transporting, storing, preparing supplies. The pyramid wasn't built by muscle alone. Behind the monument was an enormous, human support system. Eventually, the sun begins to disappear. Your muscles ache. The construction site starts quieting down. And after a day like this, there's another question. Where did the pyramid workers actually sleep? Archaeology near Giza revealed settlements associated with the people supporting and constructing the pyramid complex. Workers didn't simply disappear into the desert every evening. They lived within communities connected to this enormous construction effort. So you eat, you rest your exhausted body, you sleep, and tomorrow, you do it all over again. At sunrise, you're back among stone blocks, ropes, tools, and workers preparing for another demanding day. But there's a danger we've been ignoring. You're moving enormous pieces of stone using basic technology and human strength. Eventually, something can go wrong. So what happened when a pyramid worker got hurt? Heavy stone, basic tools, and constant physical labor meant accidents were an unavoidable danger of construction. Human remains associated with Giza workers show that some injuries healed, evidence that at least some people survived serious physical problems. Ancient Egyptian medicine wasn't modern healthcare, but workers weren't necessarily abandoned the moment they could no longer pull a rope. For everyone still able to work, however, the pyramid kept growing, and the labor continued. But here's another misconception. Pyramid construction wasn't one endless line of people doing exactly the same job. So imagine arriving at Giza tomorrow morning. What job would you actually be given? Some workers spent their days extracting and preparing the enormous quantities of limestone construction demanded.
Others needed skill and precision, shaping stone instead of simply relying on brute strength. Transportation crews faced a completely different challenge, getting enormous amounts of material exactly where builders needed it. And the Nile was crucial. The river and connected waterways allowed construction materials to travel toward the Giza complex by boat. Meanwhile, countless support jobs kept everything functioning: food preparation, tools, storage, transportation, which creates yet another problem. How do you organize so many people without phones, computers, or modern communication? Workers could be divided into crews and smaller groups, making an enormous project much easier to coordinate. And some surviving markings even preserve crew identities, giving us rare glimpses of personality inside this massive project. Suddenly, the builders stop looking like anonymous figures. They become people, teams of real human beings working toward the same enormous goal. Stone, food, water, tools, workers. Everything had to reach the right place at the right time for construction to keep moving. Thousands of years before modern engineering companies, Egypt was coordinating one of humanity's greatest construction projects. And staring at all that stone raises an obvious question. How many years did it take to finish the Great Pyramid? This wasn't a project finished in a season. Building Khufu's enormous monument required years of sustained working organization. Imagine watching it change, year after year, from enormous foundations, to rising layers, to a mountain of carefully placed stone. The Great Pyramid contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, although their sizes and weights vary considerably. And remember that block you struggled with all morning? Once it's inside the finished monument, it's almost impossible to distinguish from the rest. For the people involved, this wasn't an ancient ruin. It wasn't something from a history book. It was new. It was one of the defining projects of their own time. And if you could see their finished pyramid, you'd notice something surprising. It didn't look exactly like the Great Pyramid does today. Its exterior was originally covered with smooth casing stones, including fine limestone that created a much cleaner surface. Instead of today's rough, stepped appearance, much of the completed pyramid would have looked smooth, bright, sharply defined. Imagine seeing that for the first time. To you, this isn't mysterious ancient history. It's brand new architecture, towering over the landscape you call home. And somewhere inside that gigantic structure, there may be a stone your crew transported, handled, or helped prepare. Think about that. After all those years, all that food, all that stone, all that human effort, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Why? Why would ancient Egypt devote so much labor and so many resources to build you something this enormous? The pyramid was part of a royal funerary complex tied to kingship, death, and Egyptian beliefs about what came afterwards. Today, history remembers the king associated with the Great Pyramid, Khufu. But Khufu couldn't move millions of stones alone. Behind that monument were quarry workers, haulers, craftsmen, boat crews, bakers, and countless other people keeping the entire operation moving. So the next time you see the Great Pyramid, don't only ask, how did they build it? Ask something more human. What was it like to be one of the people who did?